Hey, it's Flo, and this is my impression of a home inspector who needs friends.
Yeah, so these studs need to be 1/4 inch further apart, give or take 1/2 inch. It's got to be just right, you know, like the coverage Progressive provides for your construction business. Otherwise, I'll have to shut you guys down. But if I do, maybe you could come out for Tuesday trivia. Fair warning, I'm kind of a know-it-all. You'll see what I mean at board game night. Hey, what's your number?
Commercial insurance that's perfect for your small business. Visit ProgressiveCommercial.com to learn more. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates.
Blog Talk Radio.
Who are the unstoppable ones?
Is it just that they can do it and I can't?
Who are the unstoppable ones?
Is it just that they can do it and I can't? Mission Unstoppable. Mission Unstoppable.
The unstoppable ones.
You did say unstoppable, right? You did say unstoppable, right? What is it they know that I don't? Coach Frankie Picasso takes you on Mission Unstoppable. Can anyone stop these people?
Good evening. I am the unstoppable. I don't know what's going on there. Boy, we got something weird happening. Hello? Is that going to stop or what? Uh-oh. Okay, I think it stopped. Yay. Okay. Good evening. I am the unstoppable Coach Frankie Picasso, and you are about to go on another Mission Unstoppable. Our guide tonight is a cultural visionary who is going to take us on a journey to the near future, to a world that no longer divides itself by color, and it is free of the ideology of different races. It's a place where each person will be judged on his or her own merit, befriended as an individual based on values, character, personality. What might our world look like, and how can we get there? Stay tuned and stay close. This is the Unstoppable Frankie Picasso. You're listening to Mission Unstoppable Radio live on Tuesday, July the 21st. Time in Toronto is 8 p.m., 7 in Chicago, 5 in Los Angeles. I want to thank the good folks here at Blog Talk Radio for allowing me to broadcast over their network. And I want to thank you, you know who you are, for tuning in to me each and every week. The phone lines are now open. The chat room is as well. Feel free to give us a call tonight at 646-595-3741, or meet us in the chat room and type any questions that you might have. This is going to be a very special show. It's a special 90-minute show, so hang in there with us. It's good. We're going to have lots of interesting dialogue. For some of us, race casting, race-based discrimination, and racial cognition will have little or no meaning. But for musician, pastor, and author Jimi Calhoun, his life has been defined by these very things. In his recent book, A Story of Rhythm and Grace, What the Church Can Learn from Rock and Roll About Healing the Great Divide, the racial divide, Jimi found that even as a senior pastor, church planter, missionary, a man who has devoted his life now to God, it is his color that enters a room before he does. Jimi has shared the stage with the who's who of rock, legends in their own time. As a bassist, he's played with Jimi Hendrix, Etta James, Elton John, Dr. John, Parliament, John Lennon, Mick Jagger, and many, many more. And he's often found acceptance for Jimi the man, something that has eluded him in the church. So let me welcome Jimi first by let you know that he served as a senior pastor at Hope Chapel, Sherman Oaks, in California, Hope Chapel, Delray Beach in Florida. He spent 6 years as a missionary to Belize City, Belize, in Central America for the Foursquare Church, and he's been part of the pastoral staff at Cedar Ridge Community Church in Spencerville, Maryland, and he's just recently moved to Texas. So tonight we are going to explore the issue of discrimination based on race, the values of Christianity, why the church hasn't taken a more active role in bridging the racial divide, and how we can encourage them to do so in the future. The next 90 minutes we're going to have some exciting guests later on in the show, and we're going to look at what each of us can do as individuals to bring heaven to earth and exist in harmony, peace, and love. Please welcome Jimi Calhoun. Good evening, Jimi, and welcome.
Hi, how are you, Frankie?
I'm excellent, thank you. And hi to everybody in the chat room. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Jimi, I wanted to first say that you have written an incredible and amazing book. When you could have traveled, when you could have traveled down the road of woe is me, you never ventured away from your vision. You always extended your hand first. You asked us to meet you halfway. You educated us. You encouraged us to see things differently. And you never, ever judged us for where we are today. That is pretty incredible.
Oh, thank you very much.
So I hope that you're really proud of that book, because
well,
I would.
It was a labor of love, and it was a long time in writing and a long time coming to fruition. But I think there were some things that needed to be said, and I'm glad that they're out there in the world, that people have a chance to pick up on some of these concepts.
I do too, and I think hope springs eternal in you. And if there are more folks like you out there, I think that we would and can build a thriving metropolis where, relationships are built on love and values and mutual interest instead of race and tribe. And I really hope to have, this important discussion tonight. It's going to be lots of fun. We can't ignore that, you were this mega rock and roll star.
Well, I don't know I would characterize myself as that. Ironically, the thing that the names that you mentioned, I intermittently played with a lot of people, but the band that I was most proud of was a band called Creation, which no one probably ever heard of. And but that's to say that we did get around and play with a lot of people and have a lot of fun, see a lot of things, and see a different type of culture. For many years, people perceived the rock and roll world to be a subculture, and kind of, in some people's view, a seemly one. But in actuality, particularly the time I was playing, it was a bunch of young people exploring music for the first time and having access to play major festivals and travel around the world. It was a very, very exciting time. Music was quite different. There was a very small band of people playing, who were aged 18 to maybe 25. And rock and roll was just coming of age, and people were having access to airplanes, and it was very, very exciting. Some of the records that I first made, they actually put Fender bass on it to distinguish or differentiate from an acoustic bass, because Fender bass is a new instrument, and so if you stayed around and played around enough, you eventually ran into everybody. I remember walking down Sunset Strip with Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles with my friend Frosty, and I don't think we made it from the Whiskey up to about 7 restaurants before we ran into like the Doors and Chicago and the Byrds or somebody. It was just every two restaurants or something, you'd run into somebody from another band. So it was a very tight-knit bunch of musicians, and it was very, very, very exciting. And I hope it was very exciting.
I mean, you, all of them, the Airplane, they've all changed our world. They totally changed our world. Grateful Dead, all of those folks. So I'm just going to play a clip from Dr. John. As I was reading your book, you brought back some memories for things I totally forgot about. The Straits. I totally forgot about the Straits. And oh man, those guys are so straight. Yeah, that was so funny to bring that back. So let's. I'm going to play a little bit of Dr. John. Iko. This is a clip from one of your favorite guys. Who doesn't remember this?
Iko, ande, Giacomo Fino andande, Giacomo Finane, my spy boy to your spy boy, sitting on the bayou, my spy boy to your spy boy, gonna set your tail on fire, talking about it.
Now, that was the sounds of Dr. John. And for those of you who may not have heard of Dr. John, who are of this generation, Dr. John, a.k.a. Mac, played a very important role for you.
Oh, that's certainly true. And we're still friends to this day. I think we recorded that in, I'm not really sure what year, but that was his first record to become a hit. It was off the Gumbo album, and it changed his world, changed my world, and we were able to start playing a little better venues. We played Carnegie Hall, which was really a big thing at the time.
Holy moly, really? Wow.
Of different festivals, and life was good, and as a result of that, we were actually able to put Creation together. But Mac is a little bit older than me, and he grew up in New Orleans, which was it was a music town, but it wasn't a music town like San Francisco. In San Francisco, everybody just played wherever they wanted to with whoever they wanted to. New Orleans really wasn't the case. It was pretty stridently segregated, and so Dr. John really loved the music that most people attributed to black people, and he paid a price to learn how to play it and to become fluent in it and to thrive in it. And so he's one of the first people I know to ever make a conscious effort and decision just to cross that imaginary line at all costs, at a time when in actuality there was a little cost involved. So hats off to Mac. He's a good doctor. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. Well, when you grew up, like, what was life growing up for you? What was it like? Did you, like, as a young child, did you know that you were black? I mean, did you know that there was a difference between you and the other kids?
Initially in my grammar school years, as I stated in the book, I grew up in a predominantly Latino or Mexican neighborhood. And my next door neighbor, my friends were Hispanic, and I would hang out with them, and their parents would speak to me in Spanish, and it forced me to learn a little bit of Spanish. And most of my friends, Jerry Perez, Art Chavez, Ray Guzman, they were all Hispanic. And for a long time, outside of mirrors, had there not been mirrors, you would have been hard pressed to convince me that I wasn't Latino. Mm-hmm. And then shortly after that, except we would go to church on Sunday, and my church would be all black. And one of the guys at church said, "Hey, Jimmy, why are you hanging out with all the Mexican guys? You know, you got to hang out with your own people." Mm-hmm. And which surprised me, because I thought I was hanging out with my own people. They were the guys on my block, and the other guys lived a couple of two streets over. And if I wanted to hang out with black people, I would have had to walk considerable distance. But so I tried. I started doing that. I started hanging out with more black people just because they were black, and it didn't really make sense. And then something happened where I wound up in a all-white school where I was the only black male, and there was one other black female, and all of the students there were primarily Italian, because in the San Francisco Bay Area it was heavily Italian. So then all my friends became Italian, you know, and I thought, well. And they stayed all through high school, Brad Gardner and Mike Goodman, and just a bunch of people who were. So I'm triracial.
You're triracial. Well, in the book, I think that you didn't even realize that there was no issue of race until you had your first kiss, and then all hell broke loose.
Yeah. That was eye-opening, because there was a drummer that lived around the corner from me, and I used to play with him, and we did a TV show early on called the Ben Alexander Show. And Tommy Sosa was kind of this genius kind of guy. He could play all the instruments, and I was trying to play piano and sing, and not doing a very good job, but I was bold and had showmanship. So we got on the TV show as a result. But there was a little blonde girl who lived next door, and we were still in grammar school, and she had a crush on me. One day she asked if we could kiss, and we did. I guess she went home and told her folks, and I thought World War III was about to start when her dad came around, and my parents explained to me that what was right, what was proper parameters for relationships between me and other people who didn't physically resemble me, and only, though, as it related to females. For some reason.
Right. Always.
It was kind of confusing, but I just accepted it, and but my acceptance didn't last long. But so.
Well, I think it's a kind of a good segue then into looking at the issue of what is race, because the Latino girlfriend that you had, who was as dark as you were, was also off limits to you.
Yeah, that's certainly true. There was a girl in my junior high school. She was pretty close to my skin color, and I started dating her, and her brother came over and told me basically that no one who looked like me was going to date her. And I'm thinking, well, we look pretty much alike. What do you mean? That I'm 5'8" and she's 5'4". Where are we going with this? And
yeah.
And he was. he was ready to rearrange my nose, and I thought, well, this guy's got a pretty bad reputation, so I'll just let this one go. But it was a little confusing, as to, and to be honest, it's still confusing because, even at this point in time, traveling around the world and you get so many different, and when you land in a different place, North America has its own ideas, and when we lived in Central America, that general region had its own ideas, and we traveled other places, and it's very, very complex and very confusing, and I wish we had more time because it would probably take us about 3 days to go to ferret out or to peel away all the layers that we could discuss tonight. Because
let me borrow from your book if I could, because
okay.
I want to start off with the issue of race. You mentioned in the book that in 1790 Congress restricted naturalization to white people, and what did the law mean by white? So you said that the Syrians were white in 1909, 1910, and 1915, but not in 1913 or 1914. Asian Indians were white in 1910, 1913, 1919, 1920, but not in 1909, 1917, or after 1923. Asians were not considered white during this period, but in 1909, the court ruled that Armenians were white, although they hail from Asia. So, in fact, skin color was not really the defining factor, but because Asians had straight hair, maybe they were white. So it begs, the question, what is race, what is white, and what is black? Can you tell? You were born with blonde hair. So are you white?
I beg your pardon? Yeah.
Are you white then? By this deference, you have blonde hair, you don't have black hair, so you must be white. How, if we can't answer this, if our government can't answer this, who can answer it for us? What does it mean?
I'm not sure, and I think it's elastic, and it's a moving target, and that's what I tried to illustrate in the book. And sometimes even those dates that you gave, you say, well, that was 1790, 1910, 1890. We certainly settled the issue now. Well, have we? This week, Julaine, there was a couple who adopted some children, and they were a little bit darker than the parents, and they would be called African American kids and white parents, and the parents call them their own.
Right.
And the person spoke to Julaine and said, "Well, what's up with that? That can't be right." And Julaine says, "Well, maybe they are theirs," and she says, "Oh, that's impossible." And this person's frame of reference didn't realize that history records several hundreds of instances where children were born that looked quite different from their parents, and there wasn't anything going on that was irregular. It was just a happenstance of the genes lining up or whatever those, the chromosomes lining up in a certain sequence that produced features that resemble, quote, another race. And
absolutely.
Beg your pardon?
I just said absolutely.
Yeah.
For all those farmers out there who raise cattle, they know that.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
I lived on a farm. We had two roan cows who gave birth to white
exactly right.
Babies, pure white babies.
And somehow we think we're independent of the rest of the animal kingdom. Sometimes when it comes to this one issue, I mean, we look for all kinds of other reasons and excuses, and it's kind of baffling. And naturally, as genes, the older mankind is, or human beings have been on the planet, the less chance of things are going to happen because people travel, and but they still have happened, and they continue to happen. And in my book, I gave an example of I was in Maryland about 2003, and I was on the computer, and I found a very odd article in the London Guardian, I believe it was. And apparently this couple had twins, fraternal twins. Now, one of the twins came out blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and the other twin came out dark skin with black curly hair.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in the book I put something, well, if we're going to use these racial designations that we've become so comfortable with, does this then mean that these two sisters who are totally related by blood
Mm-hmm.
are of different races? I mean, when they go to school to fill out an application, are they, if they're in the same class, are they going to have to fill out the blank a little bit differently? But the ironic thing about that was prior to my book going to press, and just this year, guess what? It happened again to the same
Get
couple.
out.
Yeah,
to the same couple?
To the same couple. They had another set of twins, and they each one came out a different skin tone.
Wow. Because I know that they had accused her originally of having a different father for each one. And as a mother of twins, I can attest that, you know, after you have one set of twins, you have a 50% chance to have another set of twins.
Is that right? I didn't know
that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And after 30, you have a 30% chance to have a set of twins. So her percentage went up real big time.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but isn't that absolutely amazing? And so with the world becoming so small today, you know, with this global village really becoming a village, and people mixing and intermarrying and all of this stuff. And I'm sure that even before, when people traveled, there was always been interracial marriage and lines crossing from the beginning of time, I believe. So is there one race? I mean, I thought that I had read that scientists had taken our DNA back to two people, that everybody in the world is related, you know, by DNA to these two people.
That's a very interesting concept, because, I mean, that's my professionally right now. I'm a Christian minister. I'm a pastor. I'm an ordained minister, and where the circles I travel, we profess to take the Bible very seriously. Mm-hmm. And the Bible says that two people were the progenitors of all of humankind. And yet, it's one of those instances where people, and certain people of faith, are very comfortable disregarding that particular part of the Bible and moving on and acting like it wasn't there. And you know, that's one of the interesting things. And quite frankly, that was one of the reasons that prompted me to write the book, because I thought we'd better take another quick look and quick pass by that. And you're absolutely right. Scientists have come, and the only thing they're debating now is where that cradle of civilization was. They keep finding remains in one place and another place. Oh, maybe it was here, maybe it was there, but it's pretty much unanimous, or at least it's an accepted thought that there had to have been we've all had to have had common ancestors, because still, even today, we still have all pretty much the same genes. And interestingly enough, in my research, I found that people in Ireland had more genetic similitudes, or more genetic characteristics similar to those to people living in West Africa than they did to people living in England, which in a book called Mapping Mapping of Human History, I found that, and it just blew me away.
That is very interesting. I wonder if that's where Black Irish came from.
That's what I was wondering as well. Yeah, actually, in another book, they theorized that was a result of phrenology, when people they got into measuring everyone's skulls, trying to prove that if you had a bigger skull, that you were smarter, and if you they did find that skulls had more in keeping. I'm not sure that it was Irish and African. It might have been Irish and Egyptian. I can't remember, but there was a connection where the Irish had skulls more similar with somebody on the African continent than they did with the English as well. So,
well, you know, my personal belief, Jimmy, is that we all started out black. I do believe that. If I look at, you know, coming from a line of, you know, a history of Jews, the Sephardic Jews are black. I mean, there's no other word for it. They are black, and they're very, very dark. And so if they come from the Middle East, and we're supposed to have come from the Middle East, and Bethlehem is, you know, the holy city, then how can we not have been dark or black. And I am not religious, and I don't know the Bible, but I remember reading one thing in the Bible, and maybe you can help me with it, was in Song of Solomon, in King Solomon, Song of Solomon, that when he described, his queen, she was black. She was blacker than black, was she not? And how beautiful she was.
Well, yeah, and just using the term black, I mean, it's such a, it has connotation just throwing that word out, and that's hopefully some of the things that we can get past with the book and our conversation tonight, and get people thinking about our word usage and how they sound to our ears in a musical sense. Frankie, you know how a kick or a bass groove or something evokes a certain kind of feeling in you when you hear it done funkily, if for lack of a better term. Yep. And yet the same instrument, when it's used in a symphony, it doesn't elicit the same response.
Correct.
So these words that we use, like using the word red, doesn't do anything.
Right.
But if we use the word black, which is just another word and another word for a color, it does something to everyone hearing it. It's a shame. Yeah.
Well, just to go back to red, I mean, red. Somebody said to me the other day, Frankie, you really need to walk your red road, meaning get back in touch with the native history,
okay.
Native Aboriginal Americans. But since you brought up funk, I'm going to play a little bit of P-Funk before we go to our guests, and we're going to bring them on, and Jimmy, you're going to co-host with me here and take over, and we'll have a discussion with all these fine folks who are waiting online. And all of you guys in the chat room, hey, thanks for hanging in. It's going to be just wonderful. If you have questions, if you want to call in, if you want to talk to us, I am going to open up the phone lines very, very shortly. So let's just go to a little short break. Maybe you want to go to the bathroom. Maybe you want to get a drink and get ready for the next hour with us. This is a special 90-minute Mission Unstoppable. Hang in there. Here we go. I cannot stop moving when I hear that. I just love P-Funk. It's like my most favorite thing. As a funk drummer, man, that just gets me going. I just love it so much. It is such happy music.
The drummer on that particular track was a drummer named Buddy Miles. And,
wow.
So that was Eddie Hazel and Buddy Miles and myself, and it was a really cool track. Yeah.
How great is that? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna start taking these calls here. I think I'm not sure who's on this one because it's showing up. Might be a Skype line. Let's see who's with us. Hello there. Thanks for hanging on. Who's calling, please?
Latane Scott here.
Oh, hi, Latane. How are you?
Good.
Good. I'm just going to open up these other lines because I think I know who's there. Let's see. Good evening. Hi. Is this Paula?
Yeah, I can't tell which line it is. Yeah, this is Paula Matatani. Yes.
Hello, Paula. Welcome. Just hang in for one more second.
Thank you.
I think this must be Chad. Hi, Chad.
Good
Frankie
evening.
here. How you doing?
I'm good,
excellent.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Well, let me introduce you folks to our listening audience, to those in my reading audience, that they know who you are. But for purposes of everybody else who's hanging in there, I'm going to introduce you. The first person I'd like to introduce is Dr. Paula Watanabe, And she is an associate professor in Howard University Department of Radio, TV, and Film. She's a producer-writer of Africa in the Holy Land, Significant Connections, an award-winning film on the Black presence in the Bible, shot on location in Israel and occupied Palestine. This is the only film ever made about the Black presence in the Bible, and her most recent documentary, The Power of the Image, looks at the impact of the white image of Jesus on African-American faith and identity. Dr. Madhavani is a published scholar on media, gender, race, and culture. She's also an ordained itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. She's a highly respected teacher, workshop leader, and preacher, and she's preached and taught in the United States and in South Africa. She is a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and has a BA in anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania, MA in film from Stanford University, PhD, and Master's Division degree from Howard University on race and culture. She also has a wonderful film that she's done called Faithfully Divided, and I've given a link to to the trailer anyway. And maybe, Paula, you can talk about your film a little bit and tell us folks how they can see it, because it's pretty amazing.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. I was very interested in the conversation that was going on, and also reading, what Jimi Calhoun, has to say about this whole issue of racial reconciliation in the churches. And my film, Faithfully Divided, is about that topic, looking at 3 churches in rural Georgia. And these 3 churches have a common history going back to slavery. There's 2 black churches and 1 white church. And the founders of the 2 black churches were members of the white church when they were slaves. And my great-grandmother and great-great-grandmother were in that number. But anyway, to make a long story short, after slavery, the blacks pulled out to form their own church, and the white church helped them by giving them land. And in the case of one church with my grandmothers, they had to maintain the cemetery, the white cemetery that was on the land, and it turns out that that's where those former slave owners are buried. So here you have former slaves agreeing to maintain the cemetery of former slave owners in order to get 2 acres of land, which was integral to them being able to have this church.
Into perpetuity, or like forever and ever they're supposed to do this?
Yeah. And so I went back to the church with my father, who knew the history. And, of course, the cemetery was not being kept up, because there's a different generation of people. And I took on the challenge of whether or not this promise should be kept. Should we, the descendants of freed slaves, have to maintain the cemetery of former slave owners? And I went to the white church that had done that, who had given the land, and, of course, they didn't remember anything about it. But I began to have a conversation with them to find out what kind of relationship do you guys have? Because usually when a church comes out of another church and they help them, they remain in good relationship. But that's not the case. Like there has been no relationship between the white church and the black churches since that period after slavery. And so I began to challenge them as to why they would not seek to cross the racial divide, because it's obvious that at some point they had a relationship. And I think that it's important for black and white churches to work together, particularly in a rural area, because if they came together to do ministry together, they could help impact the social issues, the social problems in their little community. But it seems they really weren't that interested in it. And so, but the film is about having this conversation about the possibility of racial reconciliation.
And we're going to come back to that. But I did want to ask you just one thought before I move on to our other guests. Paula, they must have been related to each other at some, were they not? Did you find folks that were related, black and white, through slave owner and slave in those churches?
Well, I didn't do that type of extensive history. I did not. But I know that my great-grandmother, and my great-great-grandmother used to be slaves, and they were members of that white church.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if they had any blood kinship to them, but I really don't know.
Okay. Jimmy, did you want to make a comment before I move on to our other guests? And we're going to come back to all of you, but I do want to introduce everybody.
Well, no other comment than this is a wonderful film, and that I can't wait to see it myself.
I know, in its entirety. I can't either. Chad Lassiter is nationally recognized in the field of American race relations and violence prevention among African American males. He received his master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Social Work, where he has the A. Philip Randolph Award winner in 2001. Chad also was chosen by Ebony Magazine as one of the young leaders of the Future Under 30 in February 2003. In May 2004, he was named Who's Who Among African Americans 17th edition, along with such notables as Colin Powell and Michael Jordan. In 2005, he was Philadelphia's most influential African American 10 people under 40 to watch. In 2005 by the Philadelphia Tribune. He's also one of the co-founders, current president of the Black Men at Penn School of Social Work, Inc. at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School for Social Policy and Practice. The group seeks to recruit black males in the profession of social work, as well as providing anti-racism and violence prevention training to urban and schools around the country. And he's worked on race, peace, poverty-related issues both in Africa and Israel. And presently he's adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice, where he is the 2008 recipient of the Dr. Martin Luther King Junior Community Involvement Award for Faculty and a visiting scholar at Westchester University. Congratulations on all of your awards, Chad. Amazing.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and I'm enjoying the dialogue thus far. I guess for me, being a product of the Black church, I've been, for the past 10 years, trying to find a profound way in which we can bridge the color line as it relates to the way we worship on Sunday. I think all of your viewers and all the callers, all the guests that are on the show could pretty much agree that we know that Sunday is probably the most segregated hour during the course of the week when we're looking at churches. And for me, it's really trying to get the Black church back to its fundamental core of being a social change agent and fighting for social justice where injustice exists. And I don't see that anymore. I see a lot of prosperity preaching. I see a lot of I bling because I'm happy. But I don't see them on the front lines as it relates to the prison industrial complex, HIV/AIDS in the African American community, and also a lot of the police brutality that happens in most of our urban boroughs. So I'm just looking forward to having a discussion this evening, but also providing some action items to pretty much make a clarion call to all churches with regards to humanity to come on board to really start addressing some of the things that are plaguing our communities.
Beautiful. Jimmy, did you want to make a comment as I move forward?
Actually I did. And I met Frankie through a mutual friend named Eddie Taduri, a wonderful guy that lives in Los Angeles, is doing this wonderful work. And I've been a pastor in primarily white churches, and which has been a bit of an anomaly.
Wow. And
one of the things that I typically do is challenge the people in the congregation to what is their view of people living on the margins, and also who are those people. And when you see injustice, what should be your natural response? And typically what I get is a blank stare and what a novel idea, but what do you mean? And everything that was just itemized there would have been a great answer to those questions when I put them before my congregation. And as he was articulating them, I was smiling on the phone on this end, just thinking about how nice it's going to be if I can run this tape back to my people. So that's good. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Wonderful. Latane Scott is with us, and she is the author of 15 books and an authority on Mormonism. As a former Temple Recommend Mormon, she shares insider insights about this religion through her heavily documented book, The Mormon Mirage. A former member looks at the Mormon Church today. She is an award-winning author of over a dozen books. She's published by major Christian publishers such as Zondervan, Moody, Baker, Word, and others. And in addition, she's published poems, radio plays, and hundreds of articles in magazines such as today's Christian Woman, Guidepost, Writer's Digest, the Upper Room, Christian Research Journal, Christian Retailing, and Military Officer. As a full-time writer, she also speaks at seminars, retreats, and on television and radio programs. She's a recipient of Pepperdine University Distinguished Christian Service Award for Creative Christian Writing, and she makes her home in native New Mexico. Latane responded to an advertisement that I had, as each of you did, seeking ways that the church can integrate, ways that they can bridge the racial divide. And so let's bring her words into this and how the Mormon Church has changed its position on blacks in the church.
Oh,
good evening.
While Jimmy was doing his musical thing, I was at Brigham Young University, and at that time the Mormon Church did not allow black males to hold the Mormon priesthood. And the perspective I have on that is that as a happy Mormon, I had all the answers about why that was justified. And it wasn't until after I left the Mormon Church and saw that the reasons that they were giving for denying priesthood to black males was not biblically tenable did I begin to look at it differently. But the one thing that Mormonism has done right is that they do now allow blacks to hold the Mormon priesthood. They're allowed to go to the LDS temples and perform ordinances and that sort of thing. And so I'm the voice of someone who was there in a church that was very racially divided, I mean perhaps more than any other church in the United States, and was able to make changes to the extent that there are now hundreds of thousands of black LDS members.
Wow.
Most people
amazing.
Don't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I'm still waiting for Pastor Dave to call in, but Dr. Andrea Fraser, who is a Jehovah's Witness, really wanted to be part of the show, and she ended up having to teach this evening. So she's written a letter, and she wanted me to share with you. And so I hope that you will allow me to read this letter to you. She has a very interesting background, and she has something interesting to say, I think. She's a practicing Jehovah's Witness. She says, our Christian faith does not allow for racial discrimination. In fact, we're known for love and racial harmony that exists among us worldwide. Next month, we will be offering in over 230 lands in over 80 languages, not including dialects, the Awake magazine, which is entitled Prejudice and Discrimination, Why and How You Can Cope. She wrote me a letter this morning, and she said, my background is very unique in that my mother is of mixed race and grew up in North Carolina in the 1950s. She had red hair, hazel eyes, and came from the right stock of people to run in proper circles. My grandmother was college educated, so was my mother, as am I. In my mother's family, the two worst things you could be was dark-skinned and uneducated. My father's people were sharecroppers and blessed with dark velvet skin. My father may or may not have finished high school, but was a good worker with a vivacious personality and was well respected by all because he is a good man. The worst thing to be in my father's family was a stuck-up Uncle Tom trying to make it in a white man's world. Match made in heaven, right? Okay, she says, both of my parents came of age when people were learning to define for themselves their opinions and values in life. And when they decided that they were going to make and live by their own rules, they were the first to move into they were the first in their family to move into an upper middle class white neighborhood. So growing up, we went to school with children of generals, colonels, doctors, and the like. We understood that we had to be better than the best to receive recognition as being on par with average ones of the group. The bar was set high in our home, and death was the only excuse for failure. The drive to succeed that they planted in us helped us not to view the blatant racism that we faced as an obstacle, but as an opportunity. We came to understand that fear motivated people to hate and that love conquers all. My parents took us out to work with those who live on the streets, and we dined in the homes of very notable people. My parents worked hard not to make us colorblind, but to not let the outer appearance of a man dictate his worth. As a side note, the only time my father ever spanked me was when one of the kids in my school called me a coon, and I called him a cracker. I was spanked because I shrank down to his level and used my words to harm, not to heal. I asked her a couple of questions. I asked what if any abuse, she lives in a very small town, rural town. So I asked her, what, if any, abuse have you had to withstand being the only African American living in a small rural town? She's married to a white husband. She says, no one can mistreat you without your permission. I do not carry myself in a way that people would feel like they can abuse me. I love myself too much, and it shows. However, this is a good example of how things manifest. I was doing some community volunteer work with 2 of our congregation members and was told pointedly that I was not welcomed here by a man who grew up in town. She said, I had to stop my internal search and destroy mode and calm down. I asked him, where am I not welcomed? Here in Smithsburg, in the town, or off Jonathan Street, a low-income housing area a few towns over. I asked him why I was not welcomed, and his response was, okay, this is the N-word, and I've never said this word in my life. I don't really want to say it, but it's just because you are a nigger, and niggers need to stay in their place. Again, she said she had to stop and search destroy mode. By this time we had an audience, and I knew I was on display, so I asked him in a deceptively calm voice, did he know what a nigger was? And his response was, you girl, you're a nigger. And my response to him was, if by nigger you mean a well-educated, beautiful, kind, generous, giving person with a forgiving heart, then you are right, I'm a nigger. In fact, I'm the queen of all niggers. Hail the nigger queen. That was enough to break the tension with laughter and to embarrass my friend. The beauty of the moment came when I saw my sisters in Christ visibly angry enough so that I had to stop these 2 from going after the guy and him a good thumping. Both of them are well in their 60s. My neighbors, for the most part, were apologetic for the man's behavior and assured me that I was indeed welcomed. I think that one said it best when she said that I was a threat to their comfort zone in that they could justify their beliefs because it was so easy to find bad examples to prove their point. But when you see someone who looks different from you with the same goals and aspirations, then you really have to look inward, and most people don't want to do that. She says, we've been here for 3 years now, and even the skinheads open the door at the mini-mart for me now because I treat them the same way I wish to be treated. Are they happy that I'm here? Probably not, but I'm here, and they have accepted that. I asked her, what made you marry a white man, and did you ever receive negative comments from black men or women about your departure from the tribe? She said, I married my husband because he's a good man. His color has nothing to do with it. He is my best friend, my cheering section. I could not imagine not having him in my life. There was one time when we were out in our ministry in a predominantly black area with another white couple, and when we saw an older white gentleman in the yard, my husband says, honey, we should let Mark and Margie take this one. I think this man will feel more comfortable talking to a white person. I said, okay, that's a good idea. And we took a few steps before we realized that at least only one of us fits this criteria. So we had a good laugh over that one. She says, I honestly don't see my husband as white. I just see him as Wayne. And yes, I did get some flack from black people about choosing to be with my husband. We were married quite young, before we could even legally drink. And so when we first married, people thought it was a rebellion thing. And now that we've been together for 20 years, they think it's a money thing. It's hard for them to accept that it's about love, mutual respect, because that would mean that our own prejudices would have to be questioned. They would have to face all that white men are not evil or all that black women aren't lazy, loud, or rude, and that you can love the differences in another without losing your own identity. I asked her, how did your faith help you forgive or deal with those who treat you with disrespect? She said, this is a no-brainer. Would you expect a blind man to see what is right in front of him? Of course not. People are blinded by prejudices and hatred. They can't see what is right before their eyes, and that is their problem, not mine. I can try to help them see, but if they don't open their eyes, they're the ones that are going to fall into the pit, not me. The Bible says, love believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never fails. Love of God, self, and neighbor motivates me to forgive from my heart without being asked. The Bible also says God is love, and if I'm to call myself a woman of God, then I must love, and if I did not forgive, carrying that hatred would hold me back and destroy me. I cannot give anyone an easy victory over my life like that. I asked her, what are your recommendations for bridging the racial gap? She said, I spent time overseas where I did not feel any racial tension. I was judged based on what I did, who I am, and not what I am. We need to appreciate that you can't judge a book by looking at its cover, that good and evil are not the sole possessions of any one group of people, and that someone's differences does not increase your value, nor does it decrease theirs. This one I love. I said, should we become colorblind? She said, no, colors are beautiful. We want to live in a world without variety. Or who would want to live in a world without variety? But we cannot let color dictate our worth. $1 million in gold and $1 million in diamonds still have the same value. They just look different. I think that's perfect. And do you think that we can do this while keeping distinct culture, or will they have to blend? She said, we need to keep distinct cultural ties because if we forget where we come from, we can't know where we're going. However, we're forging a new future, so some blending will have to take place in order for there to be a commonality. To some extent, it already has. If we think of 9/11, people weren't black, white, yellow, or red. They were Americans. They mourned according to their traditions, but they were in pain together because of their common experiences. My children have grown up in a multicultural life, so they've been blessed with a family of heart from all walks of life. They've taken what they love from those cultures along with the history that we have given them and are forging their own future where they understand where they belong and how they fit into the mosaic of their lives. And that is the end.
Wow. You know, Frankie, this is Chad. I find a lot of what she verbalizes to be really profound. But one thing that I recognize is that we do live in a society where, at the present time, race rules. And I know that a lot of times people want to verbalize that we're in a post-racial society because we finally get the first African-American president. Prior to that, the data was 43 white male presidents, 0 women, 0 people of color. But I fundamentally believe that we're not going to ever see a colorblind society. When I see human beings, I see their color, but I also see their humanity. When I was over in Israel, there were a lot of Jews in and around the old city who did 3 things. They either placated me, they either displayed with false generosity, or they either ingratiated me. And while I was at the Wailing Wall praying, you can imagine the stares that I received. 6'6", African-American, dark-skinned, bald-headed. What am I doing at the wall? As I continued to go throughout the old city and I head over to the side where the Muslims are, stares. When I get to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, stares. And so I think what happens is once we begin to converse with one another, we were able to break down some of those barriers, some of those walls. But I think what we also have to recognize is that doctrine and dogma are different in various churches. So, for instance, at my church, I really embrace a liberation theology, a black liberation theology, that God is on the side of the oppressed. And then growing up in the black church, I had some fundamental problems with a fan that I would use that had a blue-eyed, blonde-haired Jesus Christ on it. And then when I asked my mom and my father, you know, that I'm reading scriptures here in Sunday school that are telling me that Jesus was not this color, my mom's reply was, it doesn't matter as long as his blood was red. And then when I went off to a historical black college, Johnson C. Smith University in the South, I called my mom and I said, well, Mom, if it doesn't matter what color Jesus is, let's paint him black and look at the psychological outcomes that disadvantageously will impact whites and others for the next 400 years, because it's been psychologically damaging for a lot of African Americans and Africans to look at an image of Jesus Christ knowing that that was not the image, or to look at the Last Supper knowing that it was the artist who painted, you know, people who posed for the picture. But all this racial imagery and religious imagery that we get that comes out of the Catholic Church and various other places at times can leave people wanting to turn away from religion but to seek God. And I fundamentally believe that that's what God wants us to do. He wants us to have a relationship with him and not a relationship with a particular denomination. We have a whole lot of religion. I have to agree
with you there. I have to agree with you. Let me just stop you, though, because I think that Father Dave is here. Let me just introduce him, and then we'll all be together. Okay? Is that okay, Chad?
Oh, great. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Dave, I think that's you. Am I correct?
Yep.
Hey, how's it going?
Great, thanks.
Great. So this is Pastor Dave Is it Eisenbart or Eisenbart?
You got it.
Yep. Eisenbart. And he's a senior pastor at Living Springs Community Church, where he has been positively addressing the issue of racism within his own church. And he comes from Iowa. You've lived in Holland, Michigan, and spent the majority of your growing up years in Wisconsin. You went to Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa. You graduated with a BA in psychology, and you sensed a calling from the Lord to pursue full-time ministry, where you went to Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, graduated with a Master's of Divinity degree. You spent 5 years in the seminary. You also served as an intern pastor at Emmanuel Reformed Church in Paramount, California. Pastor Dave was installed as the associate pastor of Living Springs in Homeward Reformed Church on September 16, 1994. You're married. You have 2 boys, Joshua and Caleb, and you're married to Kristen, and you have a daughter, Anika, and now you live in Glenwood. And you answered the call as well to discuss racism within the church and what particularly your church has been doing to positively address the issue. You are you're currently where, David?
We're in Glenwood, Illinois, which is a suburb
Illinois. That's
of Chicago.
right.
And Chicago has, obviously been quite a racially divided or segregated city. And our church 20 years ago was a predominant, almost exclusively Anglo church. And today it is quite diverse as a result of some pretty intentional efforts. And so I'm real passionate about this area. I'm not published, but this is an area that we have been very intentional about building bridges and breaking down walls wherever we can, and also seeking to really bring cultures together, and in the hopes that 11 a.m. on Sunday morning wouldn't be the most segregated hour in America. And so we've been working real hard in this area to do that. So more of a practitioner.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to the show. Jimi, I'm sure that you have comments for lots of that you've heard, and so I'm inviting you to take a co-host position with me and start some dialogue.
Oh, well, I'm interested in first what David just chimed in with, and I was curious about the makeup of your church and as it relates to race. And you said it's quite diverse. Do you know what percentages of each ethnicity is represented in the congregation on a particular Sunday?
Yes. Now the church is about 20% African American, about 8% African, from African descent, and then we have a smaller population of both Hispanic and Asian. So there's quite a diversity, about 35% total now.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. And typically, in one of the problems that churches have faced when there are divergent cultures in them is how they do liturgy, how they do worship. Because across America, the worship spectrum is pretty broad. Some are more vociferous, some are more liturgical and reverent and quiet. What style of worship do you have? We're a part of the Reformed Church in America, which is a mainline denomination, which tends to be more liturgically oriented. But our church would be more contemporary, and we tend to have kind of a smorgasbord approach, where we have kind of a Living Springs sound, which is a mix of gospel and contemporary Christian music, as well as kind of the ancient hymnody and so on. So we have a kind of a blend of different cultures, and we tend to have very good.
Have a little,
that sounds really cool.
Of different music and also and also who we have on stage preaching and so on. We have 6 people on our pastoral team, and we have 3 African Americans and 3 Anglos and 2 women and 4 men. So we try to bring diversity in that way as well.
That's wonderful, and that has been one of the problems that we've faced, is trying to get more churches across America to be more diverse. Is who chooses what style we're going to have, and who's going to be representative, who actually, to break it down even farther, who has the power. And that's been one of the issues that I've run into is as I've made my way through this maze of Christendom, is that people don't want to relinquish power too readily. There's a little bit of apprehension, a little bit of fear, and I'm really glad to hear what you're doing.
I'd like to know from each of you, Chad's last comment, because I tend to agree with him that we need to take religion out of the mix and just add spirituality to our lives. I think that religion in its own tends to divide people. What do you think?
Well, the meaning of the word religion is the retying of people to God, and so it's kind of gotten a bad rap. But its meaning, its core meaning, is to retie people to their Creator, and so in that sense, religion is not a bad thing if it's done the way the Creator wanted it done.
But it discriminates, doesn't it? I mean, here's a Mormon or an ex-Mormon. Here's a a Baptist, here's a Episcopal, here's a evangelical, here's a Jew, here's a Muslim. So whether we're one color or not, we're still discriminated by what our faith and what we believe in, by the church that we go to. Because even if the church becomes multiracial, multicultural, women and men, and so inclusive, it's still, when we go, and hang out, let's say, in society, we are probably going to hang out with those who have beliefs similar to ours. Maybe people from our own church.
Can I jump in? This is Paul.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I'm not against religion, as an ordained minister, and I'm certainly not against people talking about spirituality. And probably one of the problems with religion is a lack of sufficient spirituality in there. But I think that, we can talk about style, but it's really about the substance of that church organization. Because the church itself is an earthly organization, trying to carry out a spiritual and social function. So it's about that style. And with this, with the church that Pastor Eisenberg is pastoring, it sounds very unique because typically you have that black people will go to white leadership. Black people will submit to white leadership. White people typically will not submit to black leadership. And so you have this very difficult substance problem because, we can get over style. You can have more than one worship service that accommodates the different styles, that people like. And then the other thing I wanted to say was that Jimmy talked about, he said race rules. And I really wonder, does it? As a woman, I would say that gender rules. I'm a black woman, and I don't say that color does not matter because I grew up in the segregated South riding in the back of the bus. But when I went to Jerusalem, I couldn't go to the main part of the Wailing Wall, okay? That was reserved for the men. The women had a little tiny part where they could go. We had a film camera, and we wanted to go into the Al-Aqsa Mosque at the Dome of the Rock. I couldn't go in. My crew could go in because they were males. I couldn't go in. And I really think that even though this program is not about gender, if we're talking about reconciliation, we still have to bring that subject up.
I think so. We're all human beings.
Yeah, and then the third point is, I was just in Italy, and I was at Europa at the Shrine of the Black Madonna over in there where people come, and it's a shrine where people feel like they get healing and miracles there. But when we went into the little shop that was right there at the Basilica, they were selling Mammy and Sambo dolls.
Wow.
Oh, my.
It blew my mind that image of the Black Madonna had nothing to do with racial reconciliation or diversity. And there was no one there, who we could ask that question of. So those are just some things that I wanted to put out there because I think that truly the real step to us bridging this gap is that we're going to have to enter into a fellowship of suffering, like get into other people's stories and know where you hurt, know where I hurt, and where that common humanity is.
And see, I think what Paula speaks to is something that we definitely need to look at, and I would echo her same sentiments in the sense that we don't need to talk about diversity and multiculturalism. We need to talk about racism, and it doesn't need to be a talk in which is touchy-feely, kumbaya, tiptoe through the tulips. It needs to be a conversation where we deal with the oppression of not just the African Holocaust, but also when she talks about the intersectionality of race and gender, because within the confines of churches, mosques, and synagogues, women are discriminated against often and repeatedly. And so I think that we need to have a race dialogue that deals with the historical underpinnings of how religion was used as a tool even during the time of slavery, and how women were part of the discrimination factors as well. And we need to enter into that conversation, and we need to not be PC about it, and we need to not attack one another, but maybe analyze one another's ideology, concepts, and the way religion even today controls people.
Jimmy, don't you
I'm sorry. I could barely hear you.
Jimmy, don't you think that it begins in the home? And the reason I say that is churches are made up of households, and unless we're willing to have people that are not like us in our homes, unless we're willing to start fellowship at that point, I don't think any amount of legislating or anything else, or in the case of Mormonism, changing revelations, makes any difference. If you're not willing to, on the basis of having someone in your home and extending fellowship and friendship that goes across economic and racial lines, you're not going to make any changes.
I would certainly agree with that. In that there are so many norms, so many normative, so many things that are norming on each society, and we use words like culture, and that we overuse them in ways that almost to the point where they have no meaning. And as she was sharing about the gender issue that
Paula,
I'm terribly sorry. Yes, as Paula was sharing, I thought that is so true, and yet I've been discriminated against in Jamaica because I didn't look Jamaican, whereas when I went to Belize, people treated I looked like the Belizeans, and so therefore I was more welcomed. And there's just so many layers to the onion that sometimes we need to look at the bigger thing. And I think, as Frankie said, that, or someone said, it was about spirituality and remembering that we're spiritual beings first and foremost, and that the spiritual being that we all are probably doesn't have either race nor gender, that these are only manifestations of our earthly existence.
Latine, Jimmy does. Sorry, Jimmy, but we're so short on time. You do mention in your book what Latine was talking about, that there was a senior pastor, I think, in one of your churches who told folks, I want you to go out and meet somebody of a different culture or race and bring them into your home. And you said that you cringed because, it's one thing to go out and meet, let's say, a quote-unquote black person, but to meet somebody who's going to have, if you're going to be friends with somebody, you have to have commonalities. You have to have things, that you share. I can't just go out and meet any white person and they're going to be my friend. It's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen the other way either, right?
Yeah. And one of the interesting things that I try to leave when we speak is we have an assumption of what black is, and I put it in my book, that people automatically assume they know what black is.
Right.
And I often wonder, do they know what white is? Why does this concept of white have this one broad sweeping generalization when in actuality somebody from Glenwood, Illinois, who doesn't speak Slovakian and goes over to Eastern Europe is not going to have very much in common, even though their skin pigmentation might be the same. They're going to be just as different and viewed just as differently. I think it's primarily an American phenomena that in my book I talked about. I'm sorry.
No, I said I agree with that 100%. Yeah.
That we were the only place on the continent or in the world where these two colors had a slave and master connotation or relationship. And so people invented all of these higher than average walls to keep buttressing that and making it more fortified so that it'd be more different and more diverse and more separated, and we've not been able to chip away at it very much, like my brother shared earlier about having a black president. That's one good. I'm glad somebody has a good job, but we're still not chipping away at the underpinnings, and these walls have been built so thick and so high.
Could I would like to make a comment on that. This is Paula again.
Hi.
Because, Frankie, you asked a question about how do we connect? How do you bring somebody into your home who you don't know? My own practice has been, let me tell you, it was very difficult for me. I left Atlanta, Georgia, finishing high school, not knowing any white people. And I went to the University of Pennsylvania. There were only 120 black students when I went there. And so I didn't know how to socialize with those white students. They weren't mean, but they didn't know how to cross the line, and I didn't either. But what I have learned today is that it's our stories of being human that connect us. And that's what I was trying to say, that I have found myself able to connect to older Southern white men by listening to their stories and finding small avenues for reconciliation, things I would have never done 20, 30 years ago, because I would have written them off as racist, just paint them with, like one brush. And so I'm finding that if I take the time to listen to you, to hear your story, and stop painting you with that brush that makes you white, that makes you black, that makes you Asian, but what about that which makes you human? Then I can connect to you.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Jimmy, in your book you have a story about your friend Billy Adams, and you were going to rent a place, and when the landlord found out that you were the roommate, all of a sudden, the dog couldn't be there, all of that. The same thing happened to me. As a Canadian, I live in a very multicultural country. I had never experienced really racism until I'd moved to Louisville for a couple of years and was the very first wave of desegregation. When I went to university in St. Louis, my roommate was black. We went to grab a house off campus. At first it was, a couple $100. And he goes, "Is she going to live with you?" "Yeah." "Okay, well, it's $1,000, like way out of our league. And it was the first time I'd really experienced it. And she said to me, "You can't come home with me. I live in East St. Louis. They'll kill you. We have to stay over here on this side." And every block, it was like, okay, if you're white, you can walk in. If you're black, you can. If you're black, you can. If you're white, you can't. And I'd never, ever lived in a place like that before. And it was just mind-boggling to me, how can it be this way? Why is it like this? If you're not brought up with it, it's very different.
And Frankie, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Paul is absolutely right. The thing that can break down the barriers is if we do the hard work of having race dialogue and look at one another's humanity. Because the reality oftentimes, you just told your story. There's an African proverb that articulates the lion's story will never be known if the hunter's the only one that tells it. And so, Frankie, just by you telling that story, it helps me as an African American to look at things through another lens, because oftentimes African Americans buy into their own victimization. Oftentimes African Americans feel as though they're the only ones that are oppressed. We understand that white privilege, white supremacy, institutional racism, and structural inequality exists. But we don't want people to use racism or institutional racism as a crutch, thus buying into their own victimization. So I think what we do is we have these conversations like we're having tonight, but we also need to recognize that we're not producing the leaders that we once produced before. King dies at the tender age of 39. King comes on the scene at a time where he was mentored by great men at Morehouse, Benjamin Mays, Vernon Johns, his very own father. We're not producing those type of people who can bridge the color line on both sides. What we're doing now, I don't think we are.
Chad, come on, look at you. Look at Jimmy. I mean, the men here tonight can do that.
Well, I think so, but I guess what I'm looking at is...
And women, sorry.
And women. I guess what I'm looking at the church. I'm sorry, let me just clarify this. When we're looking at the church, that's all that people tend, in the African-American community, some people tend to look at. They hear Jimmy, they hear myself, they hear Paula, they hear people on this call, and they hear other people who are doing various things in the community. But what we tend to look at is the T.D. Jakes, the Bishop Eddie Longs, the Jesse Jacksons, the Al Sharptons, and these people are not speaking truth to power in a loving manner like King did. Right before King got killed, the following day he was to do a sermon at the Riverside Baptist Church entitled Why America May Go to Hell. But King told America about itself in a loving manner. What we have now is people who want to go and write a book, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not either or, it's both and. But it's the prosperity preaching, and it's the mega churches, and it's this and it's that. It got away from voter registration and voter rallies, and it got away from bridging the gap with white churches and synagogues. And now what we see, I'm sorry, Jimmy, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, my friend.
No, I just was saying that, I hear what you're saying.
I have a question. I have a question I have to ask you guys, because this has really been bothering me for a long time, okay? Why is it African American? Why are you distinguished? He's an African American. Why is he not an American? Why? Why is everything so distinguished in that, and he's gay and he's this and she's that? And so by labeling all the time, we're keeping the lines of,
No. You see, we had to go back as African Americans, black people, And I don't know. I may be the oldest one in this conversation. I don't know. I don't know if the rest of you all grew up under slavery. Not under slavery, but under segregation.
Oh, we do know that I'm the youngest.
You're not that old.
You know, but I grew up at a time that if somebody called you black, then those were fighting words. You did. I mean, a person's skin color could be dark as tar, but you could not say, "Oh, your skin is black." You know, we had to go back and reclaim Africa. So that's a political statement that Africa has something good, and because otherwise, Africa was the dark continent, and there was no culture, no civilization, and so we deserved to be slaves because white people were doing us a favor by bringing us here as slaves, and no black person wanted to be associated with Africa, and so that was a breakthrough. That's like black American. That's a breakthrough.
Yeah. It's a great question, Frankie. I'm glad that you even had the courage to ask it. I think what it is that before we were American, we were innately African. And I think that's part of our identity. But the other thing is, if you go to various inner city schools and you ask African American children where they're from, they'll tell you, I'm from Los Angeles or I'm from Philadelphia, New York. And then when you ask white students, they'll say, I'm Italian American or I'm Irish American.
Right.
And so there doesn't seem to be a connection with Africa for African American students. But we've gone through being called niggers, we've gone through being called niggas, we've gone through being called colored, and then the ushering in that Paula and Jimmy and everyone knows of the 60s, where we get the Black Power movement, that it was okay to be black, and then we went to we're African Americans, and then sometimes my white colleagues will say, well, Chad, what are you guys today? Should I call you African American or black? So hopefully we'll get to a point where we will just look at each other from a humanity standpoint. I just think that we have a lot more work to go.
Well, I'm from Europe, but I don't say I'm Austrian Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to say that. But let me say this, and maybe add a little levity to this.
Okay.
Is that I took a Brazilian dance class. It was really like aerobics class. Brazilian, and after I took the class, I said maybe I shouldn't call myself an African American anymore because I honestly could not keep up with all the rhythms.
That's so funny.
I can tell you one story from Belize in that there's not a distinction about being an Afro-Caribbean or Afro. It's anyone who looks like me, and I'm quite dark, is a Creole, because obviously at some point I'm not pure African. The pure Africans who live in Belize are called Garifuna. So I lived next door to a tennis court, and it was a very ritzy place where most of the Europeans played. It was a private club, and people played tennis there. And there was one curly-haired, fairly light-skinned guy who kept hitting the ball over into my yard. And I decided to tell him to stop doing it because he had to jump the fence and enter my property. I was getting a little bit annoyed. And so, being the good pastor that I was, I went out and shouted at him to keep the ball over the fence and not come over anymore. And he looked up and he said, "It would have to be one of you people."
Oh, geez.
And that sent me off even more because that was one when I was younger I hated to be called. We could, all the words that Chad just mentioned weren't as bad as you people. And so then I got a little bit more vociferous with him and told him that he'd better not ever come over again. Well, my neighbor said, "Jimmy, why would you get so upset?" I said, "Because he said you people." He says, "What do you think he meant by that?" I said, "Well, because I'm black and he's white and he was putting me down." She goes, No. He's a Creole just like you. He meant you're an American and you guys are all pushy. So sometimes designations do more harm than good. I guess that's the moral of that one.
Have any of you read Lawrence Hill's book of Negroes?
I have. No.
Yeah.
No.
A fabulous book. Just absolutely, he's just an incredible writer. But he tells the story of a slave, of an African young girl whose parents had been killed by the slave traders, and then they brought her to America, and she actually made her way back to Africa and then on to England. She wanted to live to retire in England. And it's just absolutely a fascinating historical journey. Historically correct, but.
If I may, I wanted to chime in on something Chad said earlier about leadership and lack of leadership. And I think that having been a product of the 60s and having been at the epicenter of the civil rights movement that happened in San Francisco, my brother was in the Black Panthers and my nephew, and we have a tendency to romanticize how vibrant and what a great time it was as the leadership was. But the reality was it was a time when America was being embarrassed worldwide and about being this land of egalitarianism and democracy, trying to fight the Russian bears. It was moving. So the stage was set when people did have their eyes, well, we better get our act together so we can show the rest of the world that we're better than them, otherwise the Russians are going to take over. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't have that threat any longer. We're just kind of floating aimlessly out here, and social issues have kind of fallen off the trend. They're just not as important as they once were. And so I'm not so sure that I hear and run into several bright, articulate, and wonderful leaders saying a lot of wonderful things, but people aren't listening. And that's the sad part that I... Beg your pardon?
No, I'm saying, but don't you think that what Chad... I mean, like, I was impressed with what Chad had to say, you know, about the lack of leadership. Next week, Reverend C.T. Vivian, you know, who you all may be familiar with, he was King's top advisor. Mm-hmm. We're celebrating his 85th birthday down here, and C.T. has been committed to that type of reconciling leadership that challenges racism. You know, it's not about come by here, you know, and feel good, but he challenges both sides. And he set up a leadership institute because he wants to pour in all that he's learned from the civil rights movement and the human rights struggle into anybody who wants to learn.
Wow. And
you could sit at CT. I mean, I have sat with CT for 2 and 3 hours and still, you know, like he's just pouring out. And I'm wondering, you know, based on what Chad said, and what came to mind was that where is the beloved community? That's what King was talking about.
Yes.
You know, the beloved community and us being willing. And I think and this is where the church falls down. I mean, you musicians do it better, Jimmy, because you're willing to go get that best musician and make that music, irrespective of the color and nationality. That's what the music industry has done with all of its limitations and downsides. Right. But the church has not. I mean, today's leadership is just like what Chad described it as.
Okay, you're exactly right within the church. I'm hearing you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
And we're not willing to train, and we're not willing to train the next generation. You know, just hearing Paula mention that, I'm oftentimes looking at the fact that we have a lot of our seasoned pastors, and I'm not even talking about well-known churches. A lot of our seasoned pastors are 72, 73, 74, 75. At some point, it's time to actually train the next generation to maybe sit down in the congregation, you get ministered to create a new identity. Maybe what you can do is teach some of these new upcoming pastors, both males and females, you know, how to run the church from a leadership standpoint. And I look at my church. My church is Triumph Baptist Church. My pastor is the Reverend James S. Hall, Jr. He served as Jesse Jackson's mentor coming out of Greenville, South Carolina. My pastor's from Marion, South Carolina. And I even look at my pastor at 77 years old, and he's strong. But I'm also worried about what's going to happen if my pastor was to die today or tomorrow, that he's not the founder of the Triumph Baptist Church. The church is founded by Jesus Christ, depending on, you know, your particular faith. And so we look at Jeremiah Wright, who steps aside. He names Otis Moss as his successor. What we need to recognize is that these pastors cannot put themselves in a position where they're a monument unto themselves.
I certainly agree with that, Chad. And as I'm hearing you speak, I'm thinking that from a church perspective, we've lost our social mooring and our social voice, is what I'm hearing you say. And hopefully people like you and myself and Paula and Pastor Dave and
LeCaine.
LeCaine, I'm sorry. And I forgot all the names. And we can do something about it by having more conversations like this and letting people be exposed to the realities of what's going on, not only inside the church and what's outside the church.
But my question to you,
Okay.
Sorry, but my question to you, Chad, and all of you is, if even with success in training in your church, what is being done as an outreach program to bridge that racial divide? What are they doing?
Well, I know, I'll be real brief. At our church, one of the things that helps us bridge the racial divide is the Martin Luther King Day of Service, where we have a program where people from all over the city of Philadelphia come to, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, whites, faiths, non-faiths. And then what we do is we talk about King's legacy, but we also incorporate things from Native Americans, as well as talking about, the great work that Mother Teresa did. Also, what our church does is we have a prison outreach ministry that we do with, professionals, and those professionals are males who are made up of, many ethnicities. So that's some of the things that we're doing. I think we could definitely do more. I would love to see, our church membership, very diverse. We have 5,000 members, and I never see any whites at our church unless they're just visiting, or if it's, the governor of Pennsylvania who's coming because it's election season.
Yeah.
This is I would say I had a couple of
Go ahead.
A couple of things that we do. We have a team called the Building Bridges team, and they have lots of training and events and so on. And one of the things that we've developed is a thing called a breakfast club, and we encourage people of different races to get together over breakfast over a period of a year, and we tell stories. And I think the best way to grow from a them to an us is by building intentional relationships with people that are different than ourselves. And so that's one of the ways. And also events. We have a thing that we have this weekend called Taste of Reconciliation, where we have foods from about 40 different cultures, and then we have a multicultural worship service and just celebrate our differences rather than fighting one another, enjoying and celebrating our differences. So those are some of the things that we encourage.
That sounds great, Dave.
Yeah, I would just say that I would think that Chad's church and the other churches described are probably unique in making that intentional effort to reach out. The black churches, the black denomination that I am affiliated, we are actually international church, in Africa, throughout Africa, but I find that when we have our general conferences, that's not even really any recognition of the Africans and the cultural diversity and issues that they bring. They're just kind of like the poor cousins who come over here, and I think that, but my experience with most black churches, most African-American churches, are really not interested in crossing the racial divide. They may have tried in the past, and, they didn't get the kind of response that they want, and so they find it's more important to deal with the issues that are facing black people.
Correct.
Like we're behind the 8 ball, so let's focus in. And I think that's a mistake, because I think that if we work together, if black and white and Asian and others, if we can work together, then we can do more towards solving the problems. I don't think we would ever eliminate problems, but I think that we could do a lot more. So I think these other 2 churches, they're probably the minority, unfortunately.
Jimmy, I think you had it right in your book when you say we need to look at race casting, we need to look at race-based discrimination and racial cognition. That's something that we really, as white and black together, we all need to look at this and see how we can break it down, because the black community is behind the 8 ball, is not going to be able to get out from there until they can see past their own limitations. Brought to them by everybody else. It's just because we all believe it to be so it is.
Well, as Chad and Paula shared, I'm part of a predominantly white denomination. That's where I'm ordained, and we had our convention here in Houston a year ago, and they had a racial reconciliation track as one of the. One day they had some classes about racial reconciliation. The only problem was they had it on Friday after the convention was over, when most people were flying back to get back to their churches. And so for me, what I'm doing, and you asked what churches can do, I'm living in this denomination. I'm not going to leave it. I'm staying. hollering, I'm talking softly, I'm doing all I can do, but I'm living as though the racism that exists in this denomination doesn't exist. And I've taken a lot of hits for it and a lot of bumps, but somebody has to do it. There has to be somebody has to be willing to blaze a trail in every walk and every avenue of this country. If we all stay segregated and in our own sphere and try to do it in tandem or in group, I don't know how much success we'll have. I think this stuff started incrementally, and it's going to have to be reversed incrementally. And unfortunately,
we are unfortunately out of time. I invite all of you. If you'd like to have this dialogue again, please write to me, and we'll schedule another show, because I think it's so important that we keep talking about this and keep reaching out. Jimi, thank you so much for writing your book, A Story of Rhythm and Grace: What the Church Can Learn from Rock and Roll About Healing the Racial Divide. I'm going to leave us with Spirit. This is a song, positive music from Jimi's. Thank you all again for being my guest this evening. And thanks to everybody who joined us. When I was just a little child, my mama told me that I should believe in God, 'cause that is where it's at. But as I grow older, I find it hard to do. The temptation is on a rampage to fly my mind into. I'm gonna hang on to my reason. It's my only foundation. Thank you all for joining me this evening. Jimi, you've been an amazing guest, and everybody else who joined us were just fantastic. I'm going to hang up because we're still streaming and recording, but I'll talk to you after. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Good night, everybody. See you next week.